new concepts and new ways of doing things to people in a fun way, they're going to be a lot more receptive to it, which is really critical, especially if you're a change agent, right? And then when, we've sort of just mentioned that play leads to happiness, right? Because of all these endorphins that are happening. Well, happy people are productive people. We know that. That's a concept that's been around for forever. So why wouldn't you try to make your team as happy as you possibly can? Play, again, when we sort of do these things, it encourages teamwork. It helps people learn how to talk to one another. If they can talk to one another and they're happy, oh my God, you get these like incredibly productive teams. So what we're trying to do is help everyone figure out ways to foster this kind of learning and this kind of environment within your teams. Also, obviously important to us in the Agile world is helping people feel a little more comfortable with this experimentation. Like, I can play this game, I can use my imagination. If I get something wrong or I mess up or I lose, there are no consequences. And as we all know, not every organization is set up in a way where being wrong doesn't carry some pretty serious consequences, right? So again, especially as a Scrum Master or an Agile coach or any kind of Agile transformation agent, you want to help an organization in whatever way they can start developing this experimental mindset, which will kind of bleed out and start to craft this experimental culture. And we all know that that is critical to any kind of Agile success in an organization. And so if you can combine this creative mindset and these happy, productive teams with an experimentation culture, that's when you really start getting innovation within your organization. And that's really what we're trying to go for. So great quote from George Bernard Shaw down there at the bottom. And so just keep that in mind. And especially again, nowadays, as we are sort of in this environment where there are very many mental and emotionally taxing things going on around us.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah, play off a couple of points you made there, the endorphins thing, right? I'm sure many of you as coaches and consultants and whatnot have heard of the flow state, right? The gaming is all about that in many cases, right? It's this balance, this little line that you're trying to hit on right between challenging but not too challenging and interesting, to us something we'd like to do. We're competent enough at it, but it's at the edge of our skill set. So it keeps us engaged, keeps us in a flow state. And the idea of serious games in particular, one thing is with all this endorphins and brain science, game developers are not unaware of this. And in fact, it's led to some problems, quite frankly, in the world. You look around, you hear about things like gaming addiction, and in South Korea, it's been a bit of an issue at times where people have died from sitting there playing, 36 hours at a time and things like that. You hear about the mobile games where people can't let go of them. You can play off of these things purposely for good or evil, right? I mean, I think the serious game thing is, of course, trying to make this a useful tool. Into the experimentation point, many of these serious games in particular are effectively simulations of a real world environment. So it lets you, actually quite explicitly experiment with different approaches and see what happens and then undo and try again, right? So good stuff here, right? Lots of reasons why this is an important thing and why you might, add it as a tool to your tool belt. So let's get into a process here. I have formulated again, very high level. By no means is this, all the stuff you've got to do, but a high level process for thinking about how do you design a real, simulation style game here, not a 15-minute exercise, but a 4-hour, 8-hour, multi-day kind of affair, if you like. To put it simply, set your constraints, right? What can we do? Do your research, find other games, right? Figure out who's going to be playing, if they're going to be playing as themselves, playing as somebody else, right? Find out what are we trying to actually accomplish with the game, of course, and align it against that. The mechanics, all the potency in it. The story, usually I say this to last. You'll see this is, different people do this different ways, right? But I like calling this in, and I'll tell you, there's a particular reason why in this case that I have it near the end. And then, of course, the whole Agile thing, right? Once you get a game, I assure you no games ever come out right the first time. You've got to go, you've got to try them, you got to test them, you got to play with them, and often that's a significant part of this whole affair. And as it so happens, I have created a mural board, which I'm going to share with all of you and just sort of show you that now. And we'll play with it in just a little bit here. But fundamentally, it has this whole process, bit by bit, right, which you can go through and you can actually fill out all of these various areas here. And again, we'll play with this in a little bit. but it's going to be left as a reference for all of you to go off and, hopefully design your own games. So that's coming up, right? Coming up soon. And let's go a little further here before we do that. The constraints. So this is important, and it's not just about limitations. Actually, it can also free us in many ways. I think one of the fundamental things you've got to decide is just how big is this? Because again, these simulations, they could be anywhere from, I'd say shorter serious games might be half an hour, right? Some of them are not really so long, but there are ones that go for months and months are effectively perennial, right? Including some of the ones I'll show you by way of example. So deciding how long is it going to last, right? How much money can you spend? And this plays into really the fourth point there of what sort of tech tools do you want to use? One of the example I'll be showing you at some level today, not going for anything real fancy, right? Not trying to spend much money, trying to come with something very flexible. So you'll see that the tools that are in use here are not anything, elaborate, right? We're not using the Unreal Engine or the Unity or anything like this. It's much simpler, but you can go with whatever you want, right? There are very, very polished and elaborate serious games out there. And by all means, that's a viable strategy too, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So the technology, right? And when I say technology, this includes pen and paper, right? I mean, you don't need to be too elaborate for these unless you'd like to be. It's all about how fancy it seems in many ways. And how many players, right? This can really generate a lot of creativity, I think. Setting the right constraints and then saying within these boundaries, what are the options we have? So as with any project, a good place to start. What can we not do? Research. Okay, now this is, I think this is actually the fun part because what I'm talking about is playing games, okay? Go out there, find some games and play them. If you're going to build a game, it's really handy to have reference points, to have things floating around in your head and the ether there that you can take and just refer to and say, this thing I'm trying to teach them, it's kind of like this thing over here that I did in this game. And maybe I could pull it in. I'll say I do quite a lot of training class design. And honestly, that's how I do it in many cases. I think back to other stuff I've done somewhere else in some other field, and I try to pull that in to give things a little bit of a different flavor, right? To give them some sort of a novel feel. And, I think things like even reading game reviews can be helpful here because you'll find out you can learn a lot about the mechanics from the reviews themselves, even if you're not playing them that much. I've included a few examples of really fairly classic serious games. Most of these have been around for quite some time, right? And are very well established. The ones I'm listing. Fold-It was a very famous one, right? This is one of the earlier ones that I ever heard about. And it is a protein folding simulation where they essentially crowdsourced people going in and playing a little game where they're moving stuff around, which led them to produce a model of this, AIDS-causing monkey virus enzyme, a problem that had eluded scientists for 15 years. They got it in 10 days, right? So this is not just play school stuff. And the success of that one led to many copycat style things in the scientific fields, which are trying to solve all kinds of problems through very similar mechanisms. There's a lady named Jane McGonigal, okay, and she was a game developer, and she wrote a book called Reality is Broken, all right? And this book fundamentally was one of the earlier tones on so-called gamification. That is taking these ideas, and the thing we're talking about today, taking these ideas and applying them to more business situations or more real-world problems. And in that book, she actually mentioned this thing you're seeing here and then ended up expanding upon it following the book. It's called Super Better. It's really just a, trying to divvy up the tasks among your household kind of game. But it's gamified to make that more fun, right? To make people want to step up to the plate and really do the things that need to be done. Minecraft, obviously all of you know that, but what you might not know is it was in large part an educational tool originally. And it really can be utilized quite directly in that fashion. There's an educational version out there. I probably don't need to say much more about Minecraft, but obviously a super flexible game that you can do all kinds of different stuff with there. And Dragonbox, this is actually one that I played with my daughter when she was young. Dragonbox is a game teaching algebra. And in fact, that's the one you're seeing in the screenshot right there. Basically, all you're trying to do is, match up objects and then essentially eliminate ones that are redundant, right? So it's about reducing the equation and so on and so forth. And it teaches you all that by straight up tricking you, right? In the early stages, there's no numbers, there's nothing like that. There are just pictures which look similar or don't look similar. And it gradually, as you go through the rounds, it introduces more and more advanced concepts. And before you know it, you're playing with numbers instead of dragons, and there it is, right? You understand what you're doing. So it's not a new concept, right? I think Fold It, I should have looked it up, but I'd say it's at least probably a couple decades old or something. It's been around a long time, right? So a lot of these, this is something people have been thinking about for a while. There are also some examples in the Agile field specifically. There's one I haven't mentioned here, if only because in this case, I was going for ones that have some manner of a digital version for the most part, but I'll call this one out because it came out of the breakout session. And in fact, it was part of the origin of this talk at some level. The Agile Fluency game is a good one. Okay, that's another one that's not listed here. And this one, it was Arlo Belshi and I forget who the other guy who did it, but I saw them present it when they were first actually creating the game at a conference years and years ago. And that teaches you a lot of the concepts of basic agility and was used quite frequently at Microsoft, where Arlo worked back in the day. And he may still work there for all I know. But the Agile Fluency game, we were actually approached, we being LitheSpeed, by one of our clients who said, you know, I got my people and we sent them through all these training sessions and done all this. And it worked fine for the engineers, but now we're getting into less of the IT side of things and more into these business people. And, you know, we need them to have a little more fun. They're just not going to buy it. So wondering, could you, do you have could you facilitate the Agile Fluency game? And we said, well, you know, we're not certified for it. And also they don't have a digital version of that. They talked about it, but there isn't one now. So we said, well, you know, we can create something similar. And that was really the genesis of much of what you're going to see here today. But that's an excellent one, right? The Scrum card game, rather similar, not quite as complex as the Fluency game, but behaviors, principles, events, things like that, it teaches you, and it's a card game. You see it there in the screenshot, of course. Get Kanban, that's what you're seeing down at the bottom there. And this is another one that's been around for a while. Many folks in my company have played it. Obviously, it's meant to teach you Kanban. That one, it's sort of a board game like you're seeing it. It's got a scripted scenario that you sort of move through that helps teach you some things. Whereas, for instance, and by the way, you see some different styles. The Fluency game doesn't really have a story. It's principles, it's so on, it's got mechanics, it doesn't have a story. Neither does the Scrum card game. There's no story. Okay, it's about some basic mechanics that you can play in various circumstances. There is a story in Get Kanban, right? In that last one, I list Fellowship of the Goal. Truthfully, this was a new one to me. I was doing a little bit of research on my own prior to this presentation to make sure I'm up to speed on the latest developments. And that one, there actually is a story version. It was created at a conference. But interestingly, in particular, that one also has a frame, and I'm going to use this term. I'll tell you what I mean in a minute. You can download basically a storyless version of it, and you can put your own story into it, right? You can customize it and make it what you will. This was the tack that I took as well, okay? Because when building the game, what I was really hoping to do is to create something that's flexible and scalable. So it can start teaching one set of concepts, but should you choose to take it another direction, you can do that. Should you choose to layer a different story on top of it, you can do that too and do it easily. So this is just a principle, right? You don't have to follow this, but it's something I think you should think about. Do you want your game to be modular, expandable, right? Able to be taken in different directions, or do you have some very particular objective in mind? In which case, well, it probably save you some time, because thinking of building a game that is inherently flexible is not always that easy, right? You got to really consider a lot of factors. But next up, right, we got to think about who's going to be in the game. So what I mean by this is, what are their roles, titles, skill sets, backgrounds, and that's going to help us understand where we start in the game. How much detail do we need to give them, right? Are they going to be playing themselves? Are they going to be actually adopting a character of some sort? Something else Lisa mentioned early on was that this ability for people to talk about things, children, she was saying at the time, in a, say, unrealistic scenario, it can be freeing, right? It can, abstraction is a useful art, and it can get people trying things and doing things that maybe they wouldn't be so comfortable doing if they were representing themselves, right? If I can just pretend like I'm another character, I can try things that are maybe a little, well, out of character for me on average. The ones you're seeing here are basically the ones that were created for, again, the game that I'll show you a tiny little bit of here. But basically a facilitator, right? We've got then classic Scrum roles, of course, and I threw in one called Dr. Murphy. The idea was an optional role that could essentially purposefully play impediments against the team, with the idea being, hey, you got a team, they may have particular real world problems, and you may in fact like to introduce them to the game, because that's a lot of the point of it, it's a simulation. So in that way, they could do experiments and try various interventions against those problems in a safe environment where they can back it out. For instance, in that role, there's also a version of this where you don't need the role, where the impediments just essentially you roll a die more or less, and they just happen. So in many cases, you might think about that, right? Some flexibility in that sort of sense of, do you need all these roles, or might there be ones that are optional if you'd really like to take it and make it a little more advanced? Likewise, the game master, in my version, this person would need to be very fluent in agile methods because the game teaches them as it goes along. However, you could have someone take it and facilitate it with no agile experience with a couple of slight modifications. So, you know, think about who the people are, what they know, and what they're trying to accomplish. And to that point, the goals, right? When we talk about goals, this is, of course, the crux of much of it. And you might wonder why I pushed this so far into the presentation. It's because I think a lot of the things that came prior will help you to understand how big and ambitious and fancy to make this. In our case, we were going for teaching agility, soup to nuts, right? I mean, teaching the whole mindset and introducing techniques and the events and the roles and everything. So it's meant to cover a lot. And as such, I went with very high level goals. At some level, these actually are the measurement criteria used by Barclays, the big bank in the UK. Value, flow, quality, happiness. I found that they're good, right? They're good metrics. They cover a lot of ground. And underneath those, you can roll up a bunch of more specific concepts. And just for the record here, I'll show you something. For instance, you might wonder, I was showing you the mural board, but in fact, it is not actually what I used to design this game. Originally, we were just using a Word document, right? Because I'm old school and I do such things, I'm weird. But to just go slightly deeper on that one thing, you see here, these were the goals. And you see each of them also has sub-goals, right? So to be particular, where we're saying value, this isn't whatever, right? These three things are the things that are attacked in the game. Likewise in flow, these three things are the things that we're actually measuring, the things impediments are played against, the things optimizations are played against, and so on, right? So this can be, you know, short messages as specific or as broad-based as you really choose it to be. So noticing here that you could also go into much more detailed goals, and we're going to do this, right? We're going to shortly here have a little breakout, and I'm going to let you play with this in that canvas. But you might be thinking about what are some things that your teams would really like to learn, and how could we, introduce those? Once you've really figured out some of the basics of, what's going to be happening, you're trying to introduce really some virtues and vices, right? And by this, I just mean, what are the things you're trying to encourage or discourage? What are the good things, the bad things, the behaviors you're trying to drive people towards? And because you need to know this to build the mechanics correctly, of course, right? If we're able to say, okay, well, flow, who's involved in flow? And you notice this thing looks a little like an impact map. That's pretty much the way I thought about it too, right? So we're saying, for this goal, here are the roles that would be involved in various respects. Teams, well, trying to stay in flow. Leadership, trying not to disrupt flow, let's say. And we would orient everything towards that. And then we could drive into specific things that we're trying to accomplish here. This drives you to the mechanics, right? Once you know the things you want to encourage and discourage, you can build mechanics which do that. For the case of this game, went very simple. We just went with basically impediment cards, which are bad things, and optimization cards, which counteract them. So it was really regarding these, if those of you who've been in the gaming industry for a while or have played a lot of games, you may have heard the terms buff and debuff, right? These are industry lingo for really buffs are things that tend to provide you lasting benefits, right? So they give you, some sort of an armor bonus for a few rounds, or, maybe it's makes your attacks more powerful or what have you. And sometimes these things are, one-time affairs, sometimes they're lasting. So there's a combination of those ideas in here. Some of the impediments, they happen and they're done. Some of them happen and they keep happening until you do something about them. And have tried to align those things with the real world situations that happen, right? Somebody goes sick or something, they're probably not going to be sick forever for the next few rounds. So that might just happen once. They're sick for one round and then it's gone. But other things may last as you go along. And, finally, the story here. So in this case, I've gone with I'll admit, slightly hackneyed story. It's been around for a while, but it's always been a fun one. Kind of the jungle explorer thing with a little bit of a mad scientist laying traps, right? So here we've got your team is convened to essentially attack some mysterious illness that's affecting the whole world. Who knows what that is? And so they're going out to find the cure. It turns out there's this plant in Malaysia in the jungles that can take care of all of it, right? Why? Because it's got this recombining DNA that actually creates antibodies which specifically target new viruses and are able to deal with them. So great. It's broken into 4 chapters here, and actually the chapters kind of sort of follow the crossing the chasm style, early adopter, early majority, late majority, and introduce some drama there as we go along, right? I'll say, just to be very direct about this, the game I'm talking about here is by no means finished, okay? You're seeing, in fact, a work in process. And likewise, the story is partially complete, but I'm not done with it, right? And so we'll be continuing to elaborate things perhaps as we go along. But stories, in this one, this story doesn't matter, quite frankly. It's meant to add a little bit of life to the game, but you could as easily have the game with no story and all, and it would work just the same way. Or you could swap out the story with relatively trivial effort, and again, it would work the same way. So I like that, right? I find that that's a useful construct, and it means that you can take the game and add expansion packs and what have you as you go along, and it can really have a bit of a longer life as a result. And finally, of course, right, inspect and adapt. I guess one of the biggest things I'll say is don't be too ambitious at the beginning, and don't be scared to prototype in the just messiest, dirtiest little way possible. Take some real playing cards and just rewrite stuff on them and use those. Use some sticky notes, right? Just have people talk about it. Whatever lets you simulate the mechanics in a way that you can get feedback on, that is sufficient, okay? Because really what you want to do here is try a lot of different stuff. If you've ever actually seen a real video game development effort, let's say, for a big AAA studio style game, they discard more than they keep. I absolutely guarantee it. They talk about all kinds of ideas, and most of them hit the cutting board. So game design definitely is more than most other arts. You absolutely have to experiment, and experiment a lot. And if you're going to be doing that, it can't be real expensive, painful, slow, onerous experimentation. You got to make it, short and sweet. So whatever kind of prototyping you can figure out here, do that. Go for a very lightweight MVP. Typically 1 round, 1 mission, 1 island, something like that is a good frame to put around it there. It just strikes me. I never quite went back to that term. I'm using this term frame. I went to a conference for a group called NASAGA. I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard of NASAGA, but it's the North American Simulation and Gaming Association, a serious games organization. And there's also ISAGA, the international variation thereof. Basically, I took a game design class there, right, and got a certification in game design going through this. And they talked a lot about this idea of so-called game frames. Simply put, you can use any game to teach something different, right? If we take poker, you can use the mechanics of poker and do something else with it. That's a game frame, right? It's just extracting the way the game works from the content, context, and story of the game, and lifting and shifting it somewhere else and using it for some other purpose. And of course, also you can recombine games in many different interesting fashions. And that's why, again, it's so important to have a repertoire in mind, right? Some reference points you can turn to and say, oh, it reminds me of this one. And that makes your job a whole lot easier, because generating this stuff from scratch, from whole cloth, you'll find it really isn't easy in some cases to figure out all the mechanics and get it all tuned properly. So before we do this part, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a little roll over to those mural boards and going to have us play with them just a little bit. Now, let me pop something in the chat here. We've got, I've created 3 versions of them, specifically 3 separate mural boards, just for the sake of this, this particular session. So here's one of them, right? Here's another one. And here's a third one. And we could, of course, create a lot more of these, but just wanted enough for people to think about and play around a little bit. I'm thinking some of you probably have immediate ideas you want to try it, and some of you probably don't, and either way is totally fine. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to play around a little bit with this canvas. It's a likelihood that many of you have seen this tool before, but if not, I'll briefly describe it. It's called Mural, right? A big whiteboard, basically, you can play around with. And I'll just say the main thing people struggle with typically is simply navigation. So you notice I've got an outline over here to the right. That's what I'd suggest, right? I've actually taken each section and neatly organized it here, so you can just click through pretty much in the order that I have ordained up top there. What I was thinking we might do was going to do a, let's say we do a 10-minute breakout, right? We've got time for it here. And I don't want you to think about this whole canvas because it's too much, right? It's going to be overwhelming if you try to do everything. What I would encourage you to do is to think about a goal, some specific goal. Hey, we'd like to figure out how we do this. I guess I didn't lock everything, but once you come up with that goal, think about actually some mechanics, right, that might allow you to go and in fact try that goal. And that'll allow you to go in and then you can try to come up with some basic ways some mechanisms which will allow you to promote that goal while keeping people from doing things you don't want them to do. As part of that conversation, it would be interesting to talk about any games you think you could turn to as references. Oh, this is kind of like that one, or it's kind of like that one. And play around with some of the ideas, right? So this is largely a way for you to familiarize yourself with the tool, right? And also get some maybe ideas out there that you've been thinking about, right? Maybe share some of those. Because I'm hoping some of you go off and, in fact, do this, right? Go and create a game and maybe come back and share it with us in the future. So with that, I'm going to actually create a new set of breakout rooms, I think. It'll be about the same number of folks. Let's do, I'm just going to do the 3 rooms for the 3 different boards. And what I'll say is that room 1 is going to be, I'll say that'll be board 1. And got a whole bunch of you in room 1, right? Breakout room 2 will be board 2. Breakout room 3 will be board 3. And those are the links in order there that I just placed in the chat.
So Arlen, we're gonna lose the main chat when we go into our breakout rooms. So I would recommend that everybody just copy what's in the chat right now before we go into our breakout rooms.
Yeah, I'd go further. I'd just click on it, right? Just go and open it now, because once you're in Mural, you should be good, right?
But we don't know what rooms we're in yet.
You have what? I'm sorry.
We don't know which rooms we're in yet. I guess we could open all 3 and then pick.
Yeah. This is gonna be quick, so pay attention. I'm just gonna really quickly read through the names and tell you which room you're in. Room 1, Aparna, Clara, Dee Dee, Dennis, Doc McPherson, Frida, Gaurav, Jesse, Megan, Mike, Porfirio, Renee, SB, Shane, Stephen, and Steve. Mubray, that is. You're all in room 1, so you'd click on Mural 1. Room 2, it's going to be Ahmed, Anita, Chris, Elaine, Jim Binby. I got Marcus, Olga, Paul, Ramaj, Randy, Ricardo, Richard, Ron, Sandra, Sheila, Subash, and Travis. You're all in room 2. And finally, room 3 is Adi, Frederick, got Heather, Jen, Joseph, Larissa, Lisa, you're there, Mario, Michelle, Mike, Peter, Piyush, Steven, Tamara, Tina, Yogesh, and Yavi. So actually, they're pretty much in alphabetical order there for the most part. But those are the rooms you're in. And again, if you end up in the wrong one, it's no big deal. Just trying to provide a few different canvases for people to play with.
Arlen, I'm not sure that Mural 3 went into chat. I don't see it.
Okay.
It did go into chat. He doesn't have it labeled as Mural 3.
Yeah.
So Mural 2 is the top 3 lines under Mural 2, and then don't accidentally click on the bottom 3 lines under Mural 2 like I originally did.
I'm in Mural 3 and I have it, so I can pop it into the chat when we get into our breakout rooms.
Got it.
All right. So then again, we're going to do we'll do a 10-minute breakout and play around, right? See what kind of ideas you got. We'll come back at 7:15, and then I've got one more section to do here. Short section, and we're going to actually play a little game, right? So I'll show you a little bitty taste of the real thing. And with that, let's go to the rooms. And actually, let's switch to the 10-minute timer so you can keep track. I'll do that. you know, hopefully some of you were able to get some ideas out there, right? Again, this is clearly it's an elaborate thing to play with in a handful of minutes, and I completely understand that. So apologies if you struggled at all. I jumped in with one of the teams and we were speaking through, for instance, what are some things you'd like to know, right? So they came up with learn gamification or team collaboration or flow, right? Maybe those are some concepts you want to teach, followed by what are some games where you see that stuff? Keep talking and nobody explodes, or as human not, right? One space team, one of those I learned about on this very meetup actually. So, you know, given those, what are some of the undesirable behaviors if you're wanting people to collaborate more? Well, they shouldn't get angry with each other. They should not hold information tight, right? They should share it. They shouldn't be disrespectful. Whereas we'd like them to be more empathetic, compassionate, and mutually understanding. Those are things then you would turn to the other games to say, what are mechanics or characteristics of those games that would allow us to push people towards doing this stuff and not so much doing this stuff, right? They would get penalized for the undesirables. They would get rewarded for the desirable things. And, you know, for instance, yeah, I was mentioning things like they keep talking, nobody explodes is one many of you probably have run across, but essentially a bomb defusing game where one person's defusing a bomb and everyone else has the various clues they need to do so. In that game, it is a necessity to share information. Otherwise, you can't reach the goal. So that's an example of an obvious mechanic. Another game, you have multiple people creating a puzzle, but they have different perspectives on the final solution. So unless they share their perspectives, they won't win. Right? That's really what you're going for here, finding these ways to just mechanically make it kind of impossible or unpleasant to do the wrong thing while you're consistently rewarded for doing the right one. And again, there are a lot of ways to take this, so it's kind of a hard thing to sum up here very rapidly, but that's the idea, right? And I think you'll begin to get more fluid with it once you try it for a little while.
I just want to say our group, I think, came up with the best character name ever, which is Stan the Steamroller Stakeholder, who is insistent on his projects being the only ones that get prioritized. So I just want to kudos to Team 3, man. That was the best name ever.
Team 3. I like it. I like it. Yeah, there we go. Cool. Yeah, exactly, right? And if you're wondering about the stickies, the ones I had there purely for example. Right, just to sort of show you what kind of stuff you might put in each area, but you can delete those, ignore them, do whatever you want to do with them. All right. Okay, so then on to the more directly fun part, perhaps. The game I was talking about, putatively called the game of agility. It'll probably change, but the basic flow of it in this particular case, 4 hours, 4 sprints. Each sprint goes like this. Okay, you got plan where people basically pick backlog cards to do. That's what you're seeing at the top there. They basically also pick optimization cards. These are things that coaches would do classically, techniques you're implementing, process improvements. They would do a round. Basically here I've got loads of different types of puzzles. These are, in this particular case, since we're trying to teach agile concepts, they're games within games. Okay, and you'll see one of them in just a minute here. But everything from logic puzzles, right, where you've got people trying to say, you know, Jim is not the one who's the scrum master. Amy is the one who has meetings in 15 minutes or less, right? And you got to like put all this stuff together and use the clues to down select and find the right answer. There are, you know, word scrambles. We've got, you know, various physical games of various sorts that people do. Some of these are dialogues. They're, you know, watch a video and interpret it all over the place. Okay, so a lot of variety in the actual exercises. So in 15 minutes, they pick the ones to do. They track it on a mural board, which is a different one you won't see here.
Hey, Arlen, are you sharing? Are you trying to share?
Yes, yes.
You're not sharing. I can answer my own question, but are you wanting to share? I should say.
I should, right? Yeah. If you haven't seen anything else, I just pulled up this one slide. But yeah, showing you this, basically, this is the process on the left, and this repeats 4 times through 4 sprints. And again, each sprint has like a different little story attached to it to make it fun. So they plan picking the things, they do some of these puzzles basically. There's some scaling there. So a lot of the puzzles can be done by one team, but also there are variations where essentially the pieces of the puzzle are split across multiple teams and then they're forced to integrate. You'll see a very simple example of that coming up. In study, actually there is some instruction here, right? In the original game, the idea was each section you would introduce new concepts. Hey, here's what BDD is. And magically you would get optimization cards, which have BDD stuff you can now introduce, which you couldn't before. So in other words, once you learn a concept, rather, you can use it and use it for your team's benefit. And then adapt, you're going through and you're basically deciding which optimization cards to play against impediment cards. And the impediments are just what they sound like, right? Various unpleasant events that happen to the team, which are mostly realistic stuff. And that's the one where, again, you could either purposefully select them, have somebody say, this is an impediment we actually feel, so let's play this one. Or it could be a randomized affair where you just spin a little spinner and it goes. If you're wondering, that thing I'm showing there is actually another tool. It's a free thing. Okay, it's called playingcards.io. And what you're seeing here is it's this very flexible, it's just a straight up virtual card game board. Okay, there's nothing terribly complicated or complex about it. But you see these, you've got these cards, right? I've actually got some Excel spreadsheets, right? Which are actually in the background that are being integrated here, right? So these are actually being implemented and all this stuff is live information. There are a bunch of different cards for each one. You can, do different card backs, card faces, customize it all. It's free, right? So that's what I chose to use because, again, we're looking for something here in this particular case, which isn't real expensive or complicated and is flexible. So that's what this is, and that's still a work in progress at some level. So one last thing for today. We're going to play a simple version of this, okay? Just show you a single puzzle. And again, there are dozens of these, okay, in the actual game, and they're very different. But this is one simple example. And what we're going to do is we're going to do it together, okay? So I'm going to have essentially 3 teams, and we're going to, each of you has a few words. And let me just sort of roll over to this now. So each of you has a few words you need to do. And just show you some of this stuff here. I had this up, but accidentally closed it. I'm going to pull up the actual game, which is right here. All right, so what you're seeing here is a game, and I'll go ahead and share the link for this with all of you as well. A single puzzle, which is, get to the chat here. There we go. Just pop that in the chat, the link to this. I've got a quote up top. Our goal collectively is to complete this quote. It is a coded quote. So I filled in a few letters, this M, the V, and the V there. All the rest of them, we've got to figure out what they are. So the essence of it is that, for instance, the alpha team has 3 words, okay? You need to unscramble them. That's what you're doing here. The beta team has a few words. The Charlie team has a few words. These teams, I'm going to keep the same people that we had just in those breakouts there. So just remember where you were. We're not going to go into the actual breakouts. Actually, we will. We'll do the breakouts. It'll work better that way. What you're going to do is once you unscramble them, you're going to put them here. They're actually color coded. Okay, so that is a purple. One of these purple words is going to go here. Another one's going to go here. Another one's going to go here, and so on. You just got to figure out which order they go in, but they'll just neatly drop right in. And then you've got the answer key there. Once you have the words unscrambled and in place, just read the clues above them, put in the right letter up top, and we're golden, right? We've got the solution. We're going to see just how long this ends up taking us. I'm not going to swear when I lock these things. This is the thing about Mural, right? Always moving stuff around. So that's the basic gist of it. And I'm figuring you guys can complete this in like 2 or 3 minutes probably, but we'll see how it works, right? So feel free to, you can just double click on the cards and actually go there and edit them. What I'd say is maybe we can just hop in there into your respective team and leap right into it, talking to each other. Once you get to your solutions, go ahead and just move them into the box here, right? Just move the stickies up there. And then we'll pull our heads together and come back in the main session here and we'll solve it, all right? So with that, I'm gonna send us into breakouts. I'm gonna make these, make about 3 minutes long. I don't think they're very simple exercise, right? So it shouldn't take you too long, and then we'll pull back together and we'll integrate. All right. Any questions? Or everybody kind of get it? Let's do it. The words decoded at the bottom. I see that much, and you're getting them up there. The first word's wrong. It's not excellence.
That's because our group doesn't, we don't fully get it.
So this is one of the phrases from the Agile Manifesto. It's one of the principles, one of the 12 principles they've got. Here, first word, continuous.
So help us understand how 5th letter equals 1 and last letter equals 2 got us to continuous.
It doesn't. You just got to figure out continuous is the first word there. What that tells you is which of the letters in that go up here.
Oh.
So it ain't.
The
It's not
continuous
X.
there.
Oh, okay.
What's the fifth letter?
Oh, I see it. Okay.
Yep, like that. Right, it's relatively simple exercise,
Okay.
but of course gets more complicated when you have to integrate across 3 teams.
Yep.
And such
Yep,
is life,
yep.
right? Isn't it?
And it's funny because we were kind of stalled out waiting for someone else to put something up there, right? Because we don't have the first word, and we were sort of like, well, somebody's got to put something up there so we can start thinking about what this phrase might be.
Yep. And here you go. You got it.
This is interesting.
Almost got it, right? Yeah, there
I was
you go.
going to say, maybe a little. We're getting close.
Your game flow is throwing me off. It's like bottom up.
I know. It's yeah, well, this is a, weekend exercise here to pull this together. It's probably a couple of details I could do, inspect and adapt.
Inspect and adapt, right?
That's right. That's right.
Here, I'm going to help you guys out a little. I'm going to interfere.
Go for it. Go for it.
I think it's called collaboration.
That's right. It's not interfering. This is the way these things
I
work.
can't grab at the thing, so I'm having a little struggle there. There we go. Maybe
Some
that.
of the other puzzles in this actual game are quizzes, and in those cases, they're not competitive quizzes; they're collaborative quizzes, right? So they're things where the whole team has to work together to come to an answer together. So I think especially if you're going for something like collaboration, it's not a bad thing to have games where people don't necessarily fight, but they work together.
I feel like we're missing one. We're missing a blue. Okay, blue team. What did you do with your other card?
I think it was supposed to be good, but I can't remember.
I'm curious, anybody just know the quote from Einstein from the get-go? I tried to pick one. It's not too obscure, but it's not one you necessarily heard.
Someone from our group
yeah.
knew it.
I knew it. No.
Good,
Did
yeah.
anyone else?
Yeah, it was not
So
one-
once I knew it, I couldn't really do the game. You already knew. You were making that mental connection already.
Yeah, I mean, in some of these, the puzzles, again, this has to do with the audience, right?
Right.
This game was built for people who really don't know much about this. So a lot of the basic principles and you'd find the logic puzzles are very easy as well if you know this stuff already.
Right.
But if you don't, right, they help you fill in the blanks. And you've almost got it. Right. So as you're finishing up here, I'll just say, this is clearly there's a lot going on, right? It's a complex exercise to design a game. And
Love it.
yeah, go ahead. It's and so it's something really, I think you got to start somewhere and play with it for a while. But if you come up with a compelling reason, there aren't many ways to go about this that I think sit better with people, right? And allow them to free themselves more than a simple game, right? Which, are you ready for the answer? I'm just going to give it to you since we're pretty much out of time here. Games. Games are the most elevated form of investigation, right? Which you ended up getting there right at the end. That's a good, right? So games within games within games, right? You can make this thing fun and you can do it fairly easily. What I'd say is, again, I'll sort of pull us back into the main thing here just to wrap it up. What I'm hoping is some of you will try it and share it with us, right? I'd love to hear if you come up with some of these games. We're going to try to continue working the one that we showed you here and actually flesh out, make it more of a real thing. Inspecting, adapting, just starting here, right? So you're in the midst of the process. And with that, I think it pretty much brings us to the end. So just want to say thank you all so much for coming. I hope you found something interesting here to inspire you a little bit, maybe go off and do some more research. Again, this is the sort of field that can, it could grab you for years, right? So it's something that can become a personal passion, I think, as it has for me.
So I also just want to add, I've worked with a couple of teams before where they took gamification very seriously, right? So somebody had the idea that, gamification leads to happy teams, which leads to more productivity and all these things we're talking about. And so they implemented top down this huge gamification program, which actually required lots of overhead on parts of the teams. Then they had to score themselves. And then they had this, and it's like, oh, isn't this fun? You're getting badges and stuff. And all the teams are like, WTF, you just created a whole bunch, like, we resisted logging our time for 20 years. Now you're telling me instead of logging our time, you're just going to occupy all that additional stuff with things that we have to fill out in order to achieve badges, right? And so what happened there inadvertently is that the leadership team was so on board with gamification, they forced it down the throats of the teams who didn't think it was fun at all. So you've got to really understand that when we say fun has to be a part of this, fun has to be a part of this or it's not going to work. So gamification works when you have people who are like, this would be amazing and fun to do. And we did have one team out of 10 who was like, oh, we actually totally love this. But they were just a different kind of a team, right? And so they really got into belts and badges and all that stuff. Everybody else did not have any fun. And so it was not a very helpful program. So just keep that in mind. We want gamification to do all of its magic, but it has to be fun, right? Like you can't cram it down people's throats or they're not going to enjoy it and you're going to lose all the benefits of it.
Exactly. There's you'll hear all sorts of bad stories about Amazon. They gamify their warehouses, right? And it's led to good productivity results, but a lot of people are saying, but it also wears people out sometimes, right? And some of them like it, some of them don't. So yeah, it can be, and Jane McGonigal, the one I mentioned with the Super Better game, all about back in the day, World of Warcraft, badges and all that. Badges never did it for me. Leaderboards never did it for me, right? So you'll find different mechanics entice people and some people just don't care about it at all. Right? Which is why inspecting and adapting is so very critical. You love games or you don't, right? This one's fun to you. It's not fun to somebody else. That's why it's so important to test with your audience and see what happens. All right. So again, thank all of you for coming so much. And please join us next time. If any of you would like us to, take this further, let us know, right? Because we could certainly go deeper into particular aspects of it or, make this something where you introduce a certain idea, we tried it. So, just let us know and we'll try it again. Okay.
I like this. There's some great comments in the chat. Like one of the primary rules for a game is that playing is optional. I mean, so it's like, yes, thank you.
That is a good point.
I can tell you guys have been, you guys have lots of experience with this in your workplace.
All right. Well, everybody, take care. Have a lovely evening, and hopefully see you all next time.
You guys.
Bye,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks out there.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Have a great one.